And one of the ways to think about this is called diffusion theory. Just a quick rejoinder: there's another diffusion theory that has to do with how information travels among peers when a piece of information travels through the universe. It's called diffusion theory. It's not this one. This is diffusion theory about how technology spreads, about how technology gets into a culture, about how technologies get adopted or not, about how they fail or succeed. And Ev Rogers was at Michigan State, I believe. Michigan or Michigan State, one of the two Michigan schools, and came up with a number of ways of looking at this based on research in the mass media era. And then Roger Fiedler wrote a book in which he added a couple of concepts here. So Roger says, you know, the technology is not going to diffuse if it doesn't have relative advantages, especially for first users, for early adopters. The early adopters grab it, use it. It doesn't have big advantages. It won't diffuse. Early adopters are really important to technological innovation. You got to grab the geeks. If you don't grab the geeks, it ain't going anywhere. Okay? It's got to be really better. Okay? It's got to be a technology that's really better. It's got to be compatible. Boy, are we looking at that right now. Have been for the last 10 years. Satellite radio. Now, satellite radio is probably, almost certainly, almost without a doubt, better. The only way it isn't better is it isn't local. And that for some applications that makes it not quite better. Because if you have a local disaster, it's not going to tell you about what to do. But for everything else, satellite radio is way better. Choice, hundreds of stations. Stuff you can't get otherwise for lots of reasons. Could be, isn't usually, but could be individualized for the user. You know, it isn't tuned that way right now, but it could be. Okay. But nobody's got it. Until you buy a new car. And then you have one in your new car. But otherwise you don't have one. You can't take it out of your new car. You got to go buy one. The one you buy is, you could buy one that would come and go, except they put one in your car when you bought the car, so why would you buy another? If you had one before the two companies merged, the other one doesn't work. Even after they've merged, if you have the other, which is weird, it's one company, but if you have the other player, it isn't compatible with the whole system. I mean, it's just, and it's this, if you could imagine their satellite circling the Earth, they have many, but if you could imagine their satellite as like a big stadium circling the Earth, it's coming down into the atmosphere here in a second, and will probably land on your head tomorrow. They're losing millions of dollars every month, and have never come close to making a profit, and never will under this model. Largely because their machines aren't compatible with anything. Largely. You know, just can't get enough of them out there just by selling new cars. Are they easy to use? Is it easy to use? Best illustration of that is probably the PC. The chairman of the board of IBM said in 1965, I think, 67, 68, in that range, that the PC, no one needs it. Who needs a PC? Biggest computer geek in the country, in the world. Nobody will ever use them. Can't imagine it. Because they were too hard to use. The right line, you had to write line code to use the bloody things. And you guys could manage that. You and some guys over in computer science, but nobody else could. Nobody would. So, you know, Jobs and Wozniak and Gates go in the garage and sit around and probably, who knows whether they were imbibing or not, but nevertheless they get this great idea that if it looks like a desktop and uses file folders, it'll be great. And Doug Engelbrecht and some other guys think, you know, well, there's this screen and it's a mouse. Pretty soon you got this thing that people can use because it's easier to use. Okay, it's easy to use. Is it reliable? It's not reliable. Probably not going to diffuse. Pretty straightforward. It's got to work. Doesn't work, I'm not going to make it. And you're going to get buzz from it. And you see that in all kinds of technological innovations. If you don't get a little buzz, especially among early users, it's probably not going anywhere. So those were the early media, mass media, new media kinds of proposals that Ev Rogers made. And then Fiedler came along a little bit later and looked at those and said there's a couple other things that we want to talk about. One is bridges of familiarity, especially metaphors. He jumped on this PC notion, looked at what happened with the PC, and said, you know, if you've got a really good metaphor that people can understand, the icons are right, it's sort of really familiar, and it helps people get over that chasm, it's probably going to diffuse a little better than if it's really unfamiliar and it doesn't seem to work that way. Right? So these things that you can help your user become familiar with are really useful. And then the last two are a little bit more meaty, if you will. Motivating socioeconomic cultural opportunities and suppression of radical potential. And I'll share a piece with you about both of them, just to mention them real quickly and then give you an illustration. What that first one means is it's got to be the right time. I mean, if you can imagine, you know, launch, well, we just had one. Firefly Battery in Peoria just went bankrupt last week. You know, $10 million investment here, $12 million investment here. They've got a new battery technology that they're sure is the right battery. In fact, they just tied to this. Let me finish this and then tied to that as another piece. So they're pretty sure they've got an innovative battery design. They sell a few of them. It seems to work just fine. But, you know, they launched right on top of the recession. Nobody's buying new stuff. Connected to that, I just heard a piece on NPR last week that the battery industry, which is revolutionizing itself, smaller, better, there might be 100 companies or 200 in America like Firefly who have the right technology. They're going to save the battery world, and they're going to go out of business in the next year to 16 months. Because Detroit, for example, and Caterpillar and all the other industrial manufacturers haven't come along with the vehicles fast enough. So we had a bunch of government grants available for developing new battery technology because we really needed new battery technology. These guys have all these batteries made, all this battery technology ready, all the factories made. The guys at Firefly were ready to turn out 125,000 a month. Right? They made the line to put out that many batteries. And they sold like 1,000. There's nothing to put them in. Nobody's got the vehicles. So it's innovation before its time. Right? So all these companies, about 100 of them, a couple hundred of them are going to go out of business. Same sort of story as we had here. Not because they make bad batteries or because it's a bad idea, because it's not a good innovation. It's actually the direction that this stuff has to go. It's just not got the right socio-economic cultural opportunities. Okay? So I want to show you the most dramatic example of that in new media. And this is a great story. I wish I had a little better way to tell it. This will have to do. I'm going to have to read through it just a little bit. Apologize for the reading, but I'm going to try to get enough of this without having to go through every bit of it that you get the sense of it. This is called How Newspapers Tried to Invent the Web. A moment of sympathy, please, for newspapers whose readers and advertisers have been fleeing at a frightening rate, and we know newspapers are just bleeding, all over the place. It would be easy to accuse editors and publishers of being clueless about the coming internet disruption, to insist that the industry's proper reward for decades of haughty attitude, bad planning, and incompetencies is bankruptcy. But newspapers really, really tried to wrap their hands around the future and preserve their franchise. The industry has understood from the advent of AM radio in the 20s that technology would eventually be its undoing and had always behaved accordingly. For instance, publishers aggressively pursued radio licenses in the early days of broadcasting and later bought and acquired TV licenses when they were dispensed. As early as 1947, Annenberg's Philadelphia Inquirer and Knight's Miami Herald experimented with fax editions of their papers. Newspaper and other medias, and this is the one that I want to sort of focus on, newspapers and other media entities started experimenting with video text in the 1970s. Newspapers considered themselves vulnerable new entrants and weren't allowed to anybody who would listen about failing readership. In '79, the Knight Ridder newspaper chain established a Videotech subsidiary, developed its Viewtron service, clunky, toy-like by today's standards. The early system required an expensive dedicated terminal, yet after conducting trials in 1980, the system held sufficient promise that Knight Ridder succeeded in selling Viewtron franchises to other newspapers. More than a dozen other dailies played with Videotech during the decade, including the Times Mirror chain, Cowles Media, McClatchy newspapers, Sun-Times, and the Post. And they lost their shirts. Essentially, these guys were on vacation in Europe, and they saw these Videotech machines on top of televisions in hotels, in fancy hotels in Europe. And with the Videotech machine, you could order your shirts pressed, find out where the local restaurants were, find out where the local currency exchanges were, find out where the translation services were, and they came back and said, and it was hypertextual. You'd use your remote control of your TV to click on this item, and it brought up a menu from the local restaurant, and they said, "Wow, we got to do this." So they hired people. They invested $10 million. Hired people to do this Videotech piece, and they recruited a cable company in South Florida to put them on the top of televisions all over this cable distribution system in Florida. And they tried it for a year and a half. It was before the internet. Nobody used it. Nobody used it. People in this cable system in Florida had the internet in their homes before the internet was invented, and they didn't use it. So these newspaper guys went, because they chunked huge dollars into this thing. So then when the internet started, guess what they all did? We've seen that before. So they kind of pulled off for a while. And that was one of the things that slowed them down a little bit, was they'd already tested it. Didn't work. Nobody wanted it. So it's, it ain't easy to see what's coming next and to get it right. Okay? And part of that, Fiedler argues, is that there just weren't the motivating socio-cultural, economic opportunities yet. The time just wasn't right. So it just didn't take off. It's just the wrong time. And then suppression of radical potential. Now this one's a little bit hard to explain because it's a bit of a paradox. It's hard to imagine anything stopping the internet. It's so massive. I mean, it's so all-encompassing. It's hard to imagine anything stopping new media. So the notion that it's like it's going to be stopped isn't somehow, it isn't realistic yet. Where's the largest number of potential internet users in the world?
Okay.
How are they doing?
That's good.
On the internet?
Censorship.
Too much radical potential. Suppressed. Other places in the world that's the case? Absolutely. Okay. So you can stop. Now, it just happens in our political system, you can't quite stop it. Okay, in the same sort of way. Right? Have we all together decided what's going to happen with the music wars yet? Took down the industry, but as we knew it, but yet have we replaced it really with any new model that works? How about newspapers? Taking them all down. So now what are they doing? Well, let's see. As of next month, the New York Times is going back to a pay only. Now, the suspicion is it won't work. Right? But maybe they'll all say, okay, what the hell, we're going down fighting. Pay or go to Slate, go to someplace else. Go ahead, we don't care. But don't come back to the Chicago Tribune because you ain't going to come free. And the whole thing kind of, instead of just, it sort of grinds, So this suppression of radical potential is important to the diffusion of new media. If it really looks like it's going to bite, then so that's what you get the RIA suing people. They couldn't stop it, music, and they couldn't quite get on board fast enough. So what they do is crazy strategy of suing the customer. Right? I mean, it just makes no sense at all. But so what would television do if all of a sudden it really decided as an industry that it couldn't make the transition? I'll tell you what they do. They'd yank all their content. They'd pull it all. They'd say, forget about it. You can't have it. You can't use it. Right? So this notion that it's easy ain't true. And these are some of the factors that help.